What's up, guys? Welcome to the Power Hour podcast. I feel like I'm bad at intros, but Johnny always makes me do it. I wish I was more smooth, like Sigmund Bloom of Football Guys. He always kills it. He's just like, "What's up, baby? I'm Sigmund Bloom. You're on the couch. Have a seat." So smooth. I'm typically more robotic. I kind of stick to the script, but not tonight. Want to know why? Because tonight we're going to get weird. I have literally nothing planned for the show, no stats, no notes, but we have one of my favorite people in the industry on to talk fantasy defenses in MFL10s. I wholeheartedly don't expect anyone to download this. Defenses? Who cares? I'll just stream that shit. Guess what? You can't, not in an MFL10. And you should care because this might be our best podcast yet. We have on Michael Beers, a former hedge fund all-star and Excel wizard. He's legitimately one of my favorite follows and fantasy analysts out there. He's personally helped me out a ton on some of my bigger fantasy projects. He's been doing a bunch of awesome research on MFL10s. He's looked at literally every team over the past 3 years to try and figure out what works and what doesn't. Luckily for us, he's a gigantic procrastinator and never got around to writing any articles this year. So this is all a Power Hour podcast exclusive. Beers is a hilarious guy and one of the hashtag sad dads from the Elite Lemonade Dynasty League, and he currently writes, though sparingly, for Rotoviz.com. You can follow him at Beers Water on Twitter. Beers, what's going on?
Hey, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate that things are going to get weird when I'm on the show. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to be here. You're absolutely right. I've been doing a ton of work on this MFL data and writing nothing about it. So I feel like I owe the people a little something. By that I mean, however many handful of people follow me on Twitter and actually care. But yeah, we're focusing on defenses first, I guess. I promised to talk about it for at least a few minutes before jumping into whatever I want to talk about. So how do you want to get started? I mean, there's one thing with the defenses, looking at the last 3 years, this mountain of data I've been pouring through, which is actually, I've been drowning in it. I mean, we're talking about last year there were about 3,000 MFL10 leagues. You got 12 teams in each league, and then you got 20 players on each of those teams. It's just gathering all that into one place was a monster of a project in itself. But it was all worthwhile because I've learned that you should never draft the Seattle defense. You shouldn't be taking Denver. You shouldn't be taking Arizona this year, and not because they're bad defenses. I actually, for someone who's on here to talk about defenses, know very little about NFL defenses. But what I do know is that over the past few years, those first defenses off the board in MFL10s, there's always that tier. There's 1, 2, maybe 3 defenses that go 5 rounds before everybody else. Seattle has been at the top each of the past 3 years in terms of ADP, and problem is the average win rate for those picks. So we're talking about teams that pick those players, how often they win. The average for those top 3 in each of the past 3 years is under 7%. Now, if you're just pulling teams out of a hat, I mean, we're talking, there are 12 teams in a league, about just over 8% should be your win rate. We're talking random. So if you're picking these defenses, they're supposed to be the best up in the 14th, 12th, even a couple years ago, 10th round. You're basically wasting valuable picks, even if these teams do well. I was looking at Seattle in particular. They haven't been bad. They've been the first defense off the board 3 years in a row. In 13, they finished number 2 overall in MFL10 scoring for defenses, and last year in 15, they were number 5. and their win rates were just over 6% in each of those years. So it just didn't matter. Teams who were drafting these, expensive defenses, even if they felt like they or may have gotten what they paid for, the opportunity cost was too high, and their teams suffered. So yeah, that really jumped off the page for me.
That's super interesting because we had on TJ Calkins, I think, before we were iTunes official, and he was talking about how like one of his top strategies was targeting those top defenses. But what you're saying is drafting one of those, what was it, top 5?
Well, the numbers I mentioned were the top 3, but yeah, really top 5. Anything before, we're talking before the 15th round, those premium picks at defense.
It brings you to a win rate below random?
Yeah. So anything below 8% is pretty, especially over several years, that's pretty damning evidence right there.
That's really interesting. I feel like we should talk about the scoring system in MFL10s. It's 2 points for fumble recoveries, 0 points for just forced fumble, 2 points for interceptions caught, 1 for sacking a quarterback, 2 for safeties, 6 for defense or special teams touchdown. If you shut out your opponent, that's 10 points. If you only score 1 to 6, that's 7. 7 to 20, that's 4. 21 to 29, that's 1. Then 30 to 99, that's -3, which is, I feel like this is kind of unlike some other standard sites for their standard defense scoring, where if a team scores between 25 and whatever, or 21 and whatever, that's typically a lot more negative points. What you brought up was interesting. You were talking about how the Seahawks had been historically good in MFL10s. And this is pretty much the only research I did for tonight's show. And that is just looking historically at some teams that have done well in the MFL10 scoring system. And for that, I have the Panthers as the only team to finish in the top 3 in at least 2 of the past 3 seasons in MFL10 scoring. The Panthers, Cardinals, Chiefs, and Seahawks all have 2 top 5 finishes over the past 3 seasons. Drop that down to top 6, and the Rams are the only team to make it in the top 6 every year. Drop that down to the top 10, and the defenses that have made it every season are the Cardinals, 7th, 4th, and 1st, the Patriots, 10th, 8th, and 10th, and the Rams, 6th, 5th, and 6th. Drop that down to top 12, and it's all the same teams, but also the Seahawks. And it's interesting to note that the Eagles' defense has finished top 12 in MFL10s in each of the last 3 seasons. And then looking at ADP right now, the first defense off the board is the Denver Broncos, who was a monster last season. Beers, you're completely fading them?
Yeah, I am. I mean, we can talk a little bit more about it, but I'm generally going with 3 defenses in my drafts, and it just burning that Broncos. What's their ADP is, overall it's up in 13th, 14th round, or maybe even higher. I just want to use that pick on, maybe a second tight end or, first quarterback first or second quarterback that's going to add a lot more value than, to my overall roster than, that defense that I don't even know is going to be, in the top 5. I mean, one of the things about defense is that makes it even more difficult. I mentioned that, Seattle, they've been drafted high, and they actually have finished high a couple times in the past 3 years, but it's one of the hardest positions to predict. So you're putting a lot of eggs in that basket, especially if you're only going to pick 2 defenses, which I think is a mistake a lot of people make, in that they think, oh, I've got it sort of locked up by taking Denver, who I know is going to be good earlier on, and then I only need to take 1 defense later. Just sort of because I know I've got the bye weeks to take care of, and there's, I'll get a little bit extra on top. But it's really, the trade-off you're making there is not worthwhile.
Yeah, it looks like Denver's going in the 13th round, Arizona, the edge of the 13th, 14th round, and then Seattle's going in the 14th, 15th round. So they're going pretty early.
So Beers, why are you saying that 2 defense isn't enough? Is it because the standard deviation's too high? These defenses are just like all over the place. Like, sure, Denver may finish in the top 5, but they'll have weeks where they do really poorly. Or what is your case for 3 defenses over 2?
Yeah, so it's not really about the volatility of the position. It's actually more about where you can get the defenses. If you look at what's a couple of things. The defenses you're picking, I mean, except with a few exceptions that we just named, you're getting them in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th round, right? So the opportunity cost of picking a defense is relatively low. If you're saying, okay, do I take a 3rd defense or do I take my 8th wide receiver who everyone else has passed over for the past 17 rounds for one reason or another? And it's very hard for that wide receiver, even if they do perform better than 17th round expectation, to even break into your starting lineup when you've got 7 other guys who everyone expected to be better, putting up points each week. Whereas a 3rd defense is going to be able to add value to your roster. They're going to be. They've only got 2 other positions to beat out, and as I mentioned, with how unpredictable these defenses are in terms of where they're going to finish at the end of the year, and certainly how volatile they're going to be week to week. There's a lot of room to improve just going from 2 to 3. I mean, you're increasing the number of defenses by 50% there versus increasing it, 15%, 20% by adding a running back or a wide receiver. And I actually looked at last year's numbers. I looked at every possible combination of 3 defenses and what they would have done over 16 weeks. So, taking the highest score out of the 3 each week over the course of the year, and then I did the same thing for 2 defenses. And when you run that, I mean, it's pretty stark. We're on a podcast, so I can't show you my charts. I love charts so much, but the median score out of those thousands of combinations of 3 defenses is in almost the 85th percentile of the scores for the 2 defenses. So just throwing darts, I mean, you're expecting to knock out. I mean, you're going to beat a vast majority of the 2 defense combinations, and I just don't think you can get that kind of kick for your roster at another position that late in the draft.
Okay, so I think you've sold me on 3 defenses at this point. So who are the defenses you're targeting?
So the short answer is none. In that, I mean, I'm avoiding those top 3 or 4, and then I admit that I'm just not very good at projecting these defenses. I mean, I don't think anybody is, or the market at large isn't. Maybe there are a few people out there who really know what they're talking about, but I don't. So I just want 3 of them who, ideally not all 3 have the same bye week, so I'm not going to take a 0 there, and it's pretty easy to manage that. And I'm really, looking back at the past few years, there's kind of a sweet spot in the, and it's a big sweet spot, which is nice. After that first tier of maybe 4, 5, 6 defenses, and then before the last 4 or 5, I guess we're pretty good at figuring out who the really terrible defenses are going to be overall. Anywhere in the middle, you've got, if you look at win rates or you look at their actual production, it's solid. And if you can put 3 of those together into a package, I mean, I'm not really that concerned about which ones they are, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. That's one thing I would definitely want to say is that, like, the community, the fantasy football community is pretty pretty hashtag awful at predicting defensive production. I mean, you listen to, like, you go back to last year, the podcasts, and it was going into last summer, Dallas was going to be the worst defense in the league. You wanted to target Dallas, and that was where you're going to get your production in. They were not the defense that was as bad as everyone thought they were going to be. And then there were other defenses that were supposed to be, Baltimore last year was supposed to be a defense that people were going to rely on, and they were pretty awful. And I think injuries is something that really, really affects defenses that you really have absolutely no control over. So, like Beers is saying, where you're just kind of like targeting who falls is probably one of the better things, where you don't want to have, if you have a ton of exposure to a defense that's like a popular defense and they lose, like if Denver loses Von Miller, then you're completely fucked. So it's one of those things where there are lots of injuries that can happen to a defense that are going to really tank them, to where you should just kind of spread your exposure over them, and I think that makes a lot of sense as to what he was saying.
Yeah, and though there are one aspect of what Scott said earlier about the scoring for defenses in MFL10s, the points against not being as big a factor, though. I mean, if you really if you do want to comb through the defenses a little more than what I said, don't take the top 5, don't take the bottom 5. One thing to look for, I think, and we've talked about this offline quite a bit, is sort of teams that play with more pace, right? More opportunities for turnovers, for touchdowns off of turnovers, because I mean that's where you get those really big weeks that are especially valuable in best ball. So I know John, I believe, talked about San Francisco, and I don't know if you want to take it away there, but that's definitely one. They're toward the top of my most owned for that reason.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So my 2 most owned defenses right now are Pittsburgh and San Francisco, which are 2 teams that are going to push the pace on offense. And it doesn't MFL doesn't kill you when a team gets blown out. So San Francisco is going to get blown out a lot. But you look at Philly the last few years with Chip Kelly, and they had tons of like defensive and return special team types touchdowns, just simply because they were on the field more often than other teams. So even if they're not good at them, they have more chances to do them. And I don't think defensive and special teams touchdowns are so much about whether or not a team is good at doing them. It seems pretty fluky. I've looked back through the last, I don't even remember what I told Beers the other day, but I think I looked through the last 8 or 9 years, and it seems pretty up or down whether or not pace is legitimately connected to it. But we also haven't had teams that are pushing the pace like Philly has been the last 3 or 4 years throughout history. So the historical data might not be quite as good. But if you look over the last 4 or 5 years, Philly has consistently ranked in the top 13 defenses, and you look at Houston, who really pushed the mold last year, and they ranked way up there. So with defensive touchdowns and special teams and stuff. So I think San Francisco is a team you can get pretty much completely for free. So I'm taking them because they can't really be worse than their ADP, because their ADP is like defense 28, something along those lines.
Yeah, you guys completely sold me on San Francisco a couple of days ago when we were talking. Eagles were top 12 in MFL10 scoring each of the past 3 years. They were number 1 overall 2 years ago. I think that's a great point. Up until recently, or this podcast, what I've been doing is I want to treat defenses like I would, like if I'm streaming them, like you chase like home teams that are favored by a ton. And I just think that I think Green Bay right now, you can get them like super cheap. Right now they're defense 14 in MFL10s. I think with Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb all healthy, their margin of victories is going to skyrocket compared to what it was last year. I think the Colts with Andrew Luck back as well. Right now their defense 23 overall. I just like the idea of them having their quarterbacks and top wide receivers back healthy, really beating up on opponents, and then their opponents having to play catch up and just chucking the ball around, a lot of picks, hopefully pick sixes, things like that. Do you guys like that idea at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's related to the same idea of Chip Kelly's increased number of plays. I mean, it's just more opportunity, right? I mean, we're trying to increase the number of opportunities on our roster for those big plays. I mean, a 6-point or I guess 8-point when you count the 2 for the interception play for a defense that look through all those other stats, sacks and whatever that puts a team way above all the others, and you want as many opportunities for that as possible. And but it also speaks to how hard this is, right? Like with the defenses, to figure out really who's going to, define that sleeper at defense or whatever. I mean, we're talking about targeting the best offenses, to pick the best defenses, and it's not. It's like we're not going into player evaluation. We're not talking. We talked about Chip Kelly, but we're not talking about a lot of scheme or divisions or anything so far. It's really it's murky, and that's yet another thing that pushes me toward taking 3 of them instead of 2, because I'm just not going to get it right.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We really can't understate how terrible we are at projecting fantasy defenses. It's like the kicker position, just really no one knows. It's rough. I mean, historically, you can look at teams that tend to finish highly, but even like I said before, like Carolina was the only team in the top 3 to finish there every year. It's just rough. So that definitely lends to the idea of taking more than 2. You can take 2, but chances are, as good as you may feel on them, they're not going to perform how you think they will. One thing I really, yeah. Sorry, John. Go.
It's another thing. Like when you think of it from like a DFS perspective, and you're looking at like defense per week, you look at the guys who are winning like the $1 million tournaments, and it's like they're not winning because they picked a defense that blew out another team. They're winning because they picked a defense that had 2 recovery touchdowns or 2 pick sixes that were completely fluky as hell. And it's like as good as you are at predicting how good a defense is, like even if you predict the defense that's going to allow the least points scored or whatever, and like who really cares, because that has essentially nothing to do with the defensive points that team has scored over the season. So in reality, it's pretty much a crapshoot.
Yeah. Like even the people who know what the best real-life NFL defenses are, that definitely doesn't necessarily make them a great fantasy defense. I think this is maybe enough talk about defense is a position we all hate and don't really care about projecting. Let's get to the good stuff. Beers, you've been talking about this value add metric. I think is fascinating. Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have a few things. I mean, we have a lot of things, a lot of data points that we can look at when we're trying to figure out, who to pick, how to rank players, when to pick them. This whole idea of roster construction. Do I want 5 wide receivers? Do I want 10? And it's hard to. It's hard to just look at how many points does a player score when there's so many moving pieces in an MFL10 roster, right? I mean, we've got we've got a different number of starters at each position. We've got the flex position, which makes analysis of this whole best ball system 100 times more complicated. And I wanted to try to understand it a little better than just, okay, I think quarterback X is going to score 300 points and quarterback Y is going to score 250. And I want to know, all right, well, what are they going to give my team, right? That's the bottom line. What are we trying to do? We're trying to put as many points in the starting lineup as possible by the end of the year. And so there's sort of the highest level is just how many points are they going to score. And then after that, you can look at, and this is where having last year's data came in handy, you can look at, all right, how many points did they actually contribute to the roster, right? So that means when they were a starter, outscoring the other players at their position, when do they actually show up in the lineup and give me points? And that tells you maybe a little bit more. But that still didn't really do it for me, and I decided, because I don't know, I'm a geek, that I wanted to go a little deeper with the data, and I created this value-added idea, which was essentially, it was how much, or if you took the player off of your roster, how much less would you have scored last year? And what that involves is looking at, okay, so if it's a wide receiver, if you had to figure out each week that they were in starting lineup, how much would the next person in line have given you, right? And what's the difference? So say Eric Decker, right, he scored 15 points, and he happened to be your flex player in week 6, right? If your next best flex player scored 10 points, then he added 5 points of value to your roster that week, right? And this is a very, it's a lot more complex than I just took 2 minutes to explain, because as you go down the draft in like ADP, right, there are variables like, okay, well, if it's the 7th wide receiver taken, he's going to have to outscore 6 wide receivers that are better than him in order to add value in a given week, right? And all this nuance and the calculations aside, what it boils down to is, what am I going to add to my roster with this pick in this round, given what I already have on my team? So if I know that it's the 16th round and wide receivers, given we typically have 6 or 7 wide receivers on the team by then, a wide receiver usually adds about 30 points of value. Someone who's picked in the 16th round or 15th or 14th or 17th, but a quarterback, for a team that already has 1 quarterback or 2 quarterbacks, is adding between 50 and 75 points to your total by the end of the year. You're going to want to go quarterback, even if it seems like you're taking a bottom tier quarterback. It's like the idea with the defenses. If it's increasing your number of quarterbacks by 50% and can contribute more points, it's like less sexy, because you're not going to find the Odell Beckham or last year's Doug Baldwin by taking Alex Smith in that round. But if you look at the numbers, he's going to add 50 more points to your total score by the end of the year. And that's what I was trying to boil it down to. And I sort of went, I did it at the level of players, and then looked at where they were taken last year in the draft to try to figure out, what are sort of the sweet spots for the different positions. Where are you much better off taking a quarterback than a wide receiver, or a running back than a tight end, for example. And what's going to make my team better. Not just where might I find the most upside, right? Those are 2 different concepts, I think. Throwing darts at wide receivers late in the draft, you might find that guy who is a world beater this year, right? But even last year, Devonta Freeman, his win rate was 28%, which was phenomenal, right? 28% of teams with Devonta Freeman won their MFL10s. But 72% lost, right? They hit that home run and they lost anyway. So I'm not, I'm still going to take some shots, but more importantly, I'm going to focus on how to build my roster to add the most value with each pick, round by round.
Yeah, that stat is crazy. 28% of Devonta Freeman teams won it all. That really blows my mind. Should we be how important is upside in MFL10s? You know, like third place, you don't get any money. Should we be trying to treat this like a GPP and just score as many points as possible? If maybe 2 of our 3 teams finish in last, but one of our teams finishes in first, that's awesome. 6 teams that finish in third place, that means nothing to us. How are you treating it? Are you trying to treat this like a GPP, or are you playing it a little safer?
You know, I think I'm trying to find a bit of a middle ground there, in that I'm trying to make concentrated bets as opposed to a bunch of long shot bets. And not even, you know, I'm not going to have 75% in one player or anything, but I'm also going to be smart about where I take my shots. I mean, I think something a lot of people don't realize about Devonta last year was he was a 9th round pick. You know, he went between 8th and 10th round. He wasn't one of those dart throws that people talk about. You know, that was there was a lot of you know, there was strong logic that a lot of people knew behind picking him and seeing his upside, and you know, I'm going to go after guys like that that, you know, have that potential to take on a bigger role, you know, but it may not play out. But I'm not going to do it when I think that, you know, that probability is 10%, or that probability is 5%, and just because the guy is super cheap, right? Because the way I look at it, these guys in the 19th, 18th round, they aren't super cheap. What they are is they, you know, they cost another defense. They cost a quarterback. So I'm trying to be smart about it. And what I meant about being, you know, being more concentrated, that's where I'm getting my volatility. You know, if the trade-off between having 3 defenses, having 3 quarterbacks, or, you know, I mean, I'm going with 3 tight ends a lot of the time, is that I've only got, you know, 6 or 7 wide receivers. I've only got 4 or 5 running backs, and they need to hit, right? Like, that's where that's more the sort of GPP, you know, volatility mindset. That's where I'm going after it. Like, I got to be right on those guys, or I'm not going to win. But, you know, by doing that, I'm making those bets on players that I have a lot higher confidence in, right? Like the guys that I'm picking in rounds 1 through 10, I know a lot more about them. I have a lot more confidence in, you know, what they're going to do, and you know, I just need them to come out and produce what I think is a high probability outcome, because I've built this strong base with you know, with my approach to defenses and quarterbacks and so on. You know, and it's going to happen where, you know, a couple of my running backs get injured on this roster, and I don't have any of those late round flyers, and I'm just going to lose. And like you said, like, you know, I may end up with several last place teams with this approach. Or more likely, I think I'll end up with, you know, a bunch of 8th place teams, because I'll have gotten a nice foundation of points from, like I said, defense, quarterback, tight end, by stacking 3 of them together. But that doesn't win you anything. But then on those rosters where I've been smart, I've picked, you know, I picked 6 or 7 really good wide receivers that I have a lot of confidence in. I've got 4, you know, maybe 5, you know, running backs, and I've taken them in the first 5 rounds, first 6 rounds. These are guys who, if they play all their games, they are going to produce a ton of points. You know, that'll get you there. That gets you to the number of points you need to win one of these leagues. So, you know, like I said, it's sort of halfway for me. I'm not throwing darts, but I'm also not, you know, trying to just, you know, play to the average, or, you know, take it easy or play the safe way. I don't know. What are you guys doing? I mean, it's more fun to talk about, you know, like Curse on the Seahawks, right? Like, before I started doing a lot of this work, I took him quite a bit, and I think he has a ton of upside. And you know, I wouldn't argue against somebody saying that, right? Like I think but when I started doing this, it just occurred to me that the probability is what it is, and even if it comes true, and I've got my Devonta Freeman, I'm still, I still have to have a great roster outside of that, because of that 72% of the teams that lose anyway, right? Even with the best pick of all. So yeah, I'm rambling a little bit, but that's how I'm looking at it this year.
No, so I mean, like you look at it from a poker perspective. I mean, you're 80% to win a hand, and you're gonna put it in that hand 100 times out of 100, and you're still gonna lose 20 times. Where with MFLs, it's a very small sample size, so it's not something where we can play 2 million hands of poker and we can come to the optimal mean, or whatever you want to call it, after that time. So what? From you, where you're sitting, what is the optimal roster construction? Like, where are you looking to end up at from the QB position? I mean, the positions that we think of the most as, like, I guess the most volatile, the QB, the tight end, and the defense. How many do you want from each of those three for an optimal team?
Yeah, so this is still work in progress, but I'm pretty firmly in the 3 defense camp. I mean, we addressed that at length at the beginning of this, but I think I'm also going 3 quarterbacks, and the reason again being that quarterback's a little bit easier to to figure out than defense in terms of, ranking them, figuring out who's going to be at the top and so on. Though last year, pretty much everybody was wrong, mostly because of injuries. But but by going 3 quarterbacks and not, say, spending a premium pick, a 6th-round pick or 5th-round pick on Cam Newton or Aaron Rodgers, I'm getting that wide receiver running back there that I have a lot of confidence in. I'm trading off a late-round pick that is, probably going to be a shot in the dark for me. And the thing about the earlier quarterbacks is, even when they hit, if you're looking at win rates, the percent of those teams with those players that actually win their MFL10s, if you're looking at the highest win rates over the past 3 years, you'll find very few quarterbacks. I mean, 3 years ago, Peyton Manning, record-breaking year. He had one of the higher ADPs. He wasn't number 1, but he made the top 20 in win rate. But he wasn't a world beater, even though in the real NFL he was a world beater. He was setting records in touchdowns in it and everything. Like he was seasonal fantasy leagues. He was crushing it. But the price was just too high to get a guy like him or Aaron Rodgers earlier in the draft, when other teams could just stack 3 quarterbacks from rounds 13 through 16 and generate those points, or at least come close, right? And then make up the difference by having better wide receivers or running backs that they took earlier in the draft. So that's, I mean, I did the same sort of every combination analysis thing with quarterbacks that I did with defenses. And again, I mean, you get, using 3 quarterbacks from the top 30 last year, if you're just pulling them out of a hat, more than half the time you're going to get a combination that beats over 70% of the 2 quarterback combinations, even from just the top 12. Say I gave you a hat with just who we thought were going to be the 12 best quarterbacks, and I got all 30, and I got to pick 3 and you got to pick 2. I'm extremely confident that my group is going to beat yours, even if you took the best guys out of mine. So the problem is with this approach, I've got, all right, I'm at 3 defenses, great. Now I'm at 3 quarterbacks through the same thought process, great. Now I'm going to go to tight ends, okay. I kind of went through the same thing, and I'm ending up at 3 again. And now I've used 9 of my roster spots, right? And I'm sort of pushing up against a wall because you've got to start 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers. I'm only addressing these onesie positions and optimizing them. But I've also found that once you get past 7 wide receivers, once you get past 4 or 5 actually, healthy or 80% healthy running backs, the guys you're taking later in the draft just aren't cracking your starting lineup enough to to merit being there like all the time. Like I don't want to have 8 wide receivers in every draft. If I see some exceptional value fall, I might say, okay, you know what, I'll go with 2 tight ends this time because I believe in this guy. He could be my Doug Baldwin this year, and I really like him. But I think you can get enough juice out of 11 or maybe 12 wide receivers and running backs, and really lock down those onesie positions without having to spend premium picks on them. So to answer your question, I've been getting toward a lot of 3 quarterback, 3 defense, 3 tight end, then maybe 7 wide receivers and 4 running backs if I took the running backs early, or 6 and 5 if I went really heavy wide receiver early. And that's what I meant by that concentrated approach. I mean, it's hard to win these, and I'm going to have to be right on those wide receivers and running backs. But I think that is the most sort of risk-adjusted, the best way to go.
So this is like really kind of revolutionary stuff right now. I never take 3 quarterbacks. Sometimes I'll take 3 tight ends, but typically I'll grab one I really like early, so I'll only go 2. Defenses I'll mix up between 2 and 3. And the reason why I do that is because you're starting 3 wide receivers, 1 flex, and 2 running backs. So to me, it only makes sense that you spend your most draft capital on those positions, and you're also drafting by far the most players for those positions. Like, why am I going to draft 3 quarterbacks when I'm only starting 1? That feels like such a waste of draft capital. But you're saying no, primarily or for multiple reasons, but one, because of win rate. And looking at win rate, that really kind of seems true. And last year, there were no quarterbacks in the top 15 in win rate. In 2014, Russell Wilson was the only quarterback in the top 29. In 2013, the top quarterback was 15th in win rate. So according to this and your data, you're saying draft 3 quarterbacks. What's the earliest you'll draft a quarterback? You're not. I guess you're not taking Russ or Luck or Rodgers or Breeze.
So, I mean, an important part of this is I'm not doing this every time, right? Like, you have to play each draft, as it comes to you. Like, I love Breeze, for example. I mean, I've got a lot of Drew Brees. I also have a bunch of Carson Palmer. I mean, I was taking them more before I really, did a lot of this work and dove into this approach. But, the idea is I want to be taken late. Like, I haven't taken Cam in a while. Rodgers, Luck. I wasn't taking much Luck anyway, but those guys, I've sort of moved on from them because I've got wide receivers that I love in that range. I've got running backs that I love in that range, and what you said about draft capital, spending your draft capital on those positions that you have to start more of. I mean, I think I'm doing exactly that. I'm just pushing the quarterbacks further down in the draft. So those are less valuable picks, right? And I'm spending I'm getting more bang for my buck with using those higher picks on those more important positions. More important positions, but quarterbacks, they do score the most points, and having that locked in, like having that production locked in without having to spend an early pick, I think is just a huge boon to your roster. So it specifically, when's the earliest I'll take one? If Rodgers fell to the 8th, I'd take him. If Breeze in the ninth, I'd probably take him, and I'd take a tight end later than normal, or I might push my last wide receiver back around, right? But I'd still probably end up with 3. I'm not doing the take Rodgers in the 6th, and then, okay, awesome, I've got a top quarterback. I only need to take one more later so I can take an extra wide receiver. I used to make that trade-off before I did this work, and I'm not doing that anymore.
Okay, so unless there's a tremendous value, a guy drops maybe 12 spots lower than his typical ADP, you're generally loading up on running backs and wide receivers in the first 10 rounds.
So
yes.
My question, if Rodgers falls to the 7th and Breeze falls to the 9th or whatever, are you not taking those 2 and then quitting the quarterback, or what's your plan if they both those types of guys both slightly fall?
If Rodgers falls, are you taking 2 or are you taking 3 quarterbacks?
If Rodgers falls, I probably take Rodgers, and then Breeze falls. I say, you know what, God damn it! Like I wish I hadn't taken Rodgers, and I don't take Breeze. I take. It depends on who's on the board there. If we've already hit what I think there's sort of a cliff in wide receivers around the 9th or 10th round. If we haven't hit the cliff yet, I'm going to take a wide receiver. I'll probably be taking a tight end. But even though he looks like a Breeze in this case, looks like a great value relative to his normal ADP or his rank among quarterbacks, I know I can get the production by using 2 picks later. And if I'm about to fall off a cliff on wide receiver value, I want to fill in that position that like you said, I'm going to have to start 3 of every week at least.
Yeah. Beers, you're making a ton of sense, and I know I want to talk about the wide receiver who you think is at the complete edge of that cliff, but I gotta pay the bills, man. I'm sorry. I gotta do advertisements. This is a Power Hour first. We're doing ads, guys. Sorry, deal with it. Fast forward if you want, but I have a feeling this is gonna be kind of funny. This is legit. Every single one of these people has shelled out money to us. Today's podcast is sponsored by Carl Sapchek's OkCupid account. Ladies, he's single and he's ready to mingle. He likes Deion Lewis, long walks on the beach, but isn't trying to go whale watching, if you know what I mean. He likes heavy metal music and Tyler Perry movies. Hates David Johnson. All right, well, I made most of that stuff up. But if you like Dynasty football, there aren't too many better people out there to follow. And if you're an attractive, short, brunette female, I can vouch for him that he's a good guy. You can follow him on Twitter at KarlSaf Chick. He also bought ad space for his new podcast, the Dynasty 1 podcast. I listened to it a few times so far. It was really good, really funny. Johnny loves it. He's always ranting about it. Check them out at dynasty1fantasy.com. That's 1 O-N-E. And then also, my buddy Tyler Bucher bought ad space asking me to say this. Hey, Pete Turcha, don't be a jabroni. Draft C.J. Anderson. This is the first time I've ever said jabroni because I was being paid to say it, and I don't think I will ever say it again. But I'm also supposed to state my case for C.J. Anderson, which is really easy for me. I love C.J. The narrative is that he played poorly last year, but that's just not true. He played extremely well. He just wasn't used in the role that we were anticipating from weeks 8 to 17. He led the league in yards per carry with 6.4 yards per attempt. To put that in perspective, fellow Denver running back Ronnie Hillman and his 3.8 yards per carry had the same amount of rushing yards, 540, on 56 more rushing attempts over that same stretch. Literally maddening usage for Ronnie Hillman. And I agree, the usage is troubling, but Anderson outtouched Hillman 63-33 in the playoffs and 27-5 in the Super Bowl. I was talking on Twitter with Denver beat writer Cecil Lammy specifically about this, and he said, or he's blaming this usage completely on injuries. He thinks this will be a run-first team next year without Peyton Manning. And he said, quote-unquote, this year Anderson decides when he comes off the field. See Super Bowl 50. I'm a big fan. Everyone should draft him this year. He's going in the early 4th, late 3rd, which is dumb. Pete Turcha, definitely draft him as well. There's another thing I want to do too. So I'm a selfish person. I kind of only listen to new podcasts if I get a shout out. But I also know a lot of other people are like that. So being the savvy individual I am, I decided to create a new segment for the show that Johnny doesn't know about, and I'm sure he might not love. But it's called Shout Out City, and that's because I just thought of it right now. And basically what I'll do is I'll just talk about a writer I like. And so today I want to talk about two. Tyler, and not just because he bought ad space, but he's a friend of mine, and he's also a redheaded civil engineer who writes for Numberfire, Fantasy Labs, Rotoviz, and his own WordPress, gingersauce4u.wordpress.com. The dude is a monster and criminally underfollowed. He was one of the best fantasy football writers at Numberfire while I was writing there, and now that me and Johnny no longer write there, he's definitely the best. Last year, his daily fantasy helper column was a must-read for me. Literally read it every single week. Linked to it a bunch in my articles. Really great writer. You can follow him on Twitter at gingersauce4, the number, U, the letter. Gingersauce4U. Really, it breaks my heart. He's so underfollowed. He's a great guy and an awesome writer. And then last but not least, I wanted to talk about the mother goat of the Elite Lemonade Dynasty Football League, Jen Ryan. Outside of being a dirty Dallas fan, living literally walking distance from Giant Stadium, Jen is probably one of the best follows in the industry. She's legitimately, swear to God, the nicest person I've ever met on here. She's also crazy sharp. I made a nice profit in MFL10s last year, but believe it or not, she whooped me. She's the best female writer in the industry. I don't care who knows it. And she's better than probably at least 95% of the guys as well. You can follow her at FFDegenerate, D-E-J-E-N, Rit, and read her work at Gridiron Experts, FF Diehards, and Fantasy Pros. Beers, I know you're a big fan of Jen. Was there anything you wanted to add?
Oh, man. I am a big fan of Jen. The mother goat, all I can say is I got too much respect for her, and everyone should read her and follow her on Twitter and do absolutely everything she says to do with their football teams.
Boom. Count it. All right. I think this is going well so far. It's a little weird. Maybe not weird enough. Hopefully that changes now when you recommend a wide receiver I'm completely fading. Beers, who are you drafting in the 10th almost every single time?
All right, well, it's the 9th.
Ninth,
to be
sorry.
fair. But, yeah, so I think the other day, I mean, this was yesterday or the day before, I took Travis Benjamin in the 9th round maybe 4 or 5 times in the span of 24 hours in MFL10s. Yeah, I tend to enter these things in waves, so I just say it was a nice little coincidence. I just think there's too much big play ability here. I mean, one of the things I look at a lot, and I post on Twitter a lot, is these charts of, weekly performance of wide receivers and running backs and quarterbacks, etc. And trying to highlight which of these players can produce these big games you want in best ball that are really going to boost your lineup, and these guys that don't hurt you when they when they don't have those big games. And he's one of these guys who he's frustrating as hell, and or has been in seasonal leagues where you have to pick who to start, right? Like you're gonna lose to him in one league. Say you're in 2 leagues, you're gonna lose to him. He's gonna beat your ass one week, and then the next week you picked him up off waivers because nobody had him, and you start him and he puts up a 0. But I think the move to San Diego, he's playing with the best quarterback he's ever had. He's got Keenan Allen on the other side, drawing the best defenders. I mean, he's just going to slip through enough to put up enough of those big games. And and we're not talking about. I'll admit to this. I mean, last year in MFL10s, I was doing the same thing with Vincent Jackson in the 6th round, and that was a terrible idea in retrospect. I mean, he seemed like a great value. I kept saying to people, the guy hasn't forgotten how to play football. Why is everybody, fading him? Why isn't anybody taking this guy earlier? And and then he went out and crapped the bed. But it's a lot easier to stomach with a guy like Travis Benjamin in the 9th round, where I said, like, I think after that point, I'm sort of wrapping up my running backs and wide receivers at that point. I think there's a big drop-off after him. I mean, maybe there are a couple of guys you can make an argument for in terms of ADP, but, he's just going to put up enough big games. Like, I don't need him to average 20 points a game. What I need is 6 games, or a half dozen games of 25 points, right? And then he can give me some 6s and 8s. Yeah, but in MFL10s, I'll take it. I love it. As the 6th or 7th wide receiver on my team, he's going to fill in that's going to create some league-winning weeks.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Johnny. Go ahead.
In regards to Travis Benjamin, I think one thing to really note for Travis Benjamin is that Stevie Johnson was like a huge target last year, and he was going to be behind Gates and Keenan both. And this year, everyone's kind of backed off of like that 3rd target in San Diego, and I think that kind of recency bias is playing into Travis Benjamin's ADP in the sense that Malcolm Floyd in 2014 was the standard wide receiver 30, and I think he was the PPR like wide receiver 40, and that's well within the range of Travis Benjamin's ADP. And I think outside of that, I think Benjamin has plenty of opportunity to increase on Malcolm Floyd's role in San Diego, because I think he is a more versatile receiver than Malcolm Floyd was. And even if he only gets Malcolm Floyd's role, he's still probably going to have a bigger role than Floyd had last year and the year before, because there is no Ladarius Green to steal that downfield threat role.
Yeah, so here's my thinking. I think that the Malcolm Floyd role is completely overrated, especially in best ball leagues. Last year, Malcolm Floyd had 1 game of over 15 fantasy points. In 2014, Malcolm Floyd had 1 game of over 15 fantasy points, as well as Travis Benjamin being completely overrated prior to last season. In 2014, Travis Benjamin had only 1 game of over 15 fantasy points. I don't see that doing much for your best ball teams as a wide receiver 6 or wide receiver 7. I also don't think he's #good.
My big question to you, Scott, how many snaps did Travis Benjamin play in 2013?
He played plenty of snaps. I don't know. Let me check. 2013 or 2014?
2013 and 2014. Give me both.
Well, I was just referencing 2014 and 2015.
Either way.
Okay, hold on.
In 15, Benjamin was kind of that guy in 15 that everyone thought, each week, Benjamin this was a fluke, this was a fluke, this was a fluke. I mean, I was a guy who I wasn't playing him week to week in DFS leagues. I wasn't recommending to pick him up in waiver wire leagues, and I think a lot of people were on the same page, smart people in the industry. There are a few people, Sigmund Bloom, for instance, who was advocating actually spending waiver wire budgets on him early on, and that saw some talent in him. And he ultimately was a guy that if you reacted on early on, you really benefited from him last year. So I don't know. I think he's kind of an in-between this year, and I think his price is so depressed that it's sort of okay to gamble on him.
All right. So 3 years ago, he played 150 snaps. The year after that, he played 394 snaps. Last year, he played 875. But a big reason why I'm fading him is because he was PFF's 86th ranked wide receiver out of 119 qualifying. Just really bad numbers. He ranked tied with Riley Cooper and Jordan Norwood. It's not good.
Yeah, I think my argument really boils down to the opportunity and less so the player. I mean, really, he's shown an ability to produce that big play, right? I mean, I won't say consistently. I won't argue that he's the most talented receiver in the league. What I will argue is that he's got a guy who, Rivers is not at his peak right now, but he's got a guy who's going to be able to get him the ball, and that team, they throw. I mean, this is not like in Seattle with Lockett, who's a much better receiver, but they're going to be a lower volume passing game, and I'm not going to pretend that he's a better player than Lockett, but he's also probably 5 rounds cheaper now, or not 5, 4 rounds cheaper now, and he's going to get the opportunity. I mean, it's there. You know what? Maybe he'll botch it, and maybe I wasted my 9th round pick, 2 dozen times, but I think there's enough juice there that it could turn into a very nice return.
Okay.
I think for that pick to really fizzle out, Stevie Johnson and both Gates have to stay healthy for the whole year, and I think that's really just not ever going to happen.
I mean, Phillip Rivers did lead the league in passing attempts last year, so who knows? But we are running a little low on time. This has been awesome so far. Beers, was there anything else you wanted to get to? We didn't really touch on tight ends too much.
Tight ends. Yeah, I mentioned briefly that I sort of fall in the same take 3 of them camp. I'm still trying to sort that one out a little bit, I think, because I really love those guys sort of in the after Gronk and Reed tier. There's sort of Gronk, there's 2 rounds later, or 2 or 3 rounds later, there's Reed, and then you've got the Olsons and Delanie Walkers and Kelsey. I like those guys a lot, actually. And
but you're still going 3 tight end with those guys?
Well, that's the thing. I was going 2 tight end a lot, sort of earlier in the off season, and taking one of those guys. So I have a fair amount of exposure there. And then I sort of I wanted to practice what I preached in doing this work, and sort of move to a later. The thing is, with the tight ends, I mean, if I'm taking the defenses last and I'm taking the quarterbacks right before them, I am moving further up the draft when I'm doing the tight ends, right? So I'm talking about 10th, 11th, 12th round guys. There's a lot of talented guys there, and we're not talking about scrubs. But I am still trying to figure out whether maybe adding another running back or another wide receiver, depending on how the draft plays out, is worth it if to get one of those guys like Kelsey or Delanie Walker, because they just seem like, I don't know, it just seems like the right kind of value there.
All right, well, I think this is a good segue to, I guess, what we can end on here. Who are your highest owned guys, and are you balancing ownership, or are you not afraid to just really commit to a guy? What are you doing?
Yeah, so I was just pulling that up, actually. Well, we mentioned Benjamin. He's, I think he's my number 1 wide receiver right now, and again, not because he's my favorite guy in the world, but the price is right. Among running backs, I mean, I am all over Jamal Charles. I love that guy. In terms of Points per game. I mean, I know the risks, right? He is his second ACL injury in however many years, and people are talking about how he may get spelled with a couple of competent guys behind him. But we all thought Niall Davis was a competent guy who would spell him for a while, and when Charles is on the field, he makes plays. He scores a lot of fantasy points, and he scores touchdowns. They don't pull him near the goal line to keep him healthy. I mean, I don't think they're going to start doing that now. And he's going in the second round. I mean, that's the big thing, right? Like if he were an early first round pick, I'd have probably as much of him as I have of Le'Veon Bell, Gurley, those guys. But the fact that I can get a roster with Bell and Charles makes. I mean, I'm almost an auto pick in the second half of the second round if he's there. So he's definitely at the top of the list there. I mentioned a couple of quarterbacks that I have a lot more of, though I'm not sure that's going to last given my sort of shift in philosophy here. But I was buying up Breeze like crazy. He was going in the 9th round, even when these things MFL10s first opened up in March. He was going in the 10th, maybe even later. It's on some drafts. I would grab him every time. I mean, that guy, he's a rock. He just goes out and puts up top 5 seasons. And you're not paying top 5 quarterback prices for him. When I'm talking about fading those guys in 5th, 6th, 7th round, I mean that's a big opportunity cost. If you can get Breeze, who's he just goes out there, puts up however 4,000 plus yards and however many touchdowns every single year, no matter how crappy his receivers are. I was eating that up. His ADP has come up a little bit, I think, over the past month and a half. More people have started talking about him. More recently, sort of in the cohort that I'm targeting now, the sort of later quarterbacks, I really like Stafford. I think things just sort of came together for that offense the second half of the year. I hate that Megatron's gone, but I just think they're going to throw a lot, and as a platoon quarterback for me, I think he's going to put up some good numbers. I'm not counting on him to be a top 6 guy by the end of the year or anything like that, but I also don't need it. Another guy, let's see, what positions are... I mean, those are good guys that are probably toward the top. I don't have the sheet in front of me anymore, but I was getting a lot of, Doug Baldwin. There we go. I don't think everybody's on Doug Baldwin, but I don't like I just don't like the regression argument for Doug Baldwin. I think there needs to be more to the argument against him than there is, and maybe I just haven't seen it yet, and maybe I don't understand it. But Scott, you just the other day tweeted a few things, stats about him. He was the second best wide receiver over the second half in fantasy points behind Antonio Brown. I mean, he's not going to do that again. Fine, but I'm getting him at the end of the 4th, early 5th, and if you give me 3/4 of what he did last year, everybody's saying Russ is going to throw the ball more. All the arguments that, besides the pure Lockett is just good, which I believe that he is. I mean, there are a lot of arguments for Lockett that people are not applying to Doug Baldwin, I think. And his ADP should be higher given what he did last year and what hasn't changed for him this year. He just got paid. He's going to outperform his ADP, and I'm snapping him up when I can.
Beers, I know I completely agree with a bunch of those guys. I know Johnny agrees with them as well. This is awesome. This is a fantastic podcast debut, man. You killed it. For our listeners out there, you can follow Mike Beers at Beerswater on Twitter, BeersWater. or check out his hashtag charts on charts on charts. Really tremendous job. For those of you who are listening on iTunes, if you liked our new intro song, it was done by Alex Bradshaw, the lead singer of Saturday Drive. You can check him out on Twitter at Slopshaw, SLOPSHAW. Also, like, super really cool news. My fantasy league decided to comp a free MFL10 for us. If you want to get in on that, reply on our Twitter page, leave us a positive review on iTunes, subscribe, follow, retweet, all that good stuff. And our social media intern will at you on Twitter and give you the link, and you'll be all hooked up. Right now it's going to be me, and I'm going to win. Johnny, Beers, Rummy, Harmon, Lake, Graham, all the guys we've had. Trust me, you're going to want to get in on this. Really great pod today, guys. Johnny, any last words?
No, man. Follow me at SuperDuperman22. Follow Scott at DudeFantasyBro. If you want to subscribe, if you want to get the iTunes links as quick as possible, subscribe, please. Don't ask us why it hasn't showed up on the feed. Subscribe. If not, find us on Stitcher, Google Play Music. Other than that, we're out.
Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Beers, man. This was awesome.
So am I.